In the U.S., the government did say they were looking into WikiLeaks. There supposedly was a grand jury formed. But, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues. I mean, the first one obviously is jurisdictional. Where is WikiLeaks? Does the U.S. court have jurisdiction over it? And I am very dubious that they do.
Yeah.
And then the second is what we've kind of talked about, is that even if they did, would there be, there's obviously not a chance for prior restraint because the publication's already occurred.
Sure.
But could there be a prosecution? And there the espionage laws, would give the government an opportunity, but there are a lot of First Amendment defenses that we have as well. Espionage is badly written, a lot of vagueness, which is a constitutional problem. There are intent requirements that are somewhat ambiguous, and if the intent has to be to harm the country, that probably couldn't be found, whereas if it's just intent to distribute, that's a different question. And we also have a doctrine that I think is very, very important and worth noting, and that doctrine is that even if a statute bars publication or punishes publication, that statute is held to be unconstitutional if the publication is newsworthy, truthful, and if the entity publishing didn't do anything illegal to get the material. And it doesn't matter if you know that someone else down the chain did do something illegal. It only comes into play if you're complicit in that illegality. But if you're not, and the publication is newsworthy and truthful, which in these cases it all is, then a law barring or punishing publication is unconstitutional absent the government interest of the highest order, and that's really never been litigated what that is. So my point is that for the prosecution of publication, there are a lot of potential defenses in the states.
Yep.
But because of the balance and the traditions that I've talked about, there really isn't a lot of case law or precedent on how that all would play out.
So do you think the US authorities really want Julian Assange?
I think gutturally, yes, but I think as a matter of practice, no. I think that jurisdiction, they know, is a very, very high hurdle to pass. And even if so, whether they really want to be prosecuting the press, if he can be called the press, in terms of political public view, it's just not our tradition to do that.
Well, we get back into the issue of whether he's a publisher or whether he's the
right,
source. I mean,
right,
if
true,
he's the
that's
source,
true
then
too.
they might want to and be able to extradite him to
What government typically does, maybe not typically, but can do, is go after the ultimate source, and that's what they've done in this case.
Well, that's
Bradley Manning
I want
sits
to ask
in
you
jail.
about Bradley Manning. I mean, he languishes in jail at the moment. He was the original source.
Right.
What's your view of the treatment of Bradley Manning?
I would just answer again by reference to the Pentagon Papers case, that they did the same thing with Daniel Ellsberg. I mean, Ellsberg was tried, quickly arrested and tried right after the Pentagon Papers disclosures. Frankly, he would have, I think, doubtless been found guilty, just like Manning is likely to be if there's a trial. But in the Ellsberg case, which is also instructive, as a precursor to Watergate, what happened was that, first of all, as I think many people who lived in that era will remember, the Nixon administration broke into his psychiatrist's office to get dirt on him. Secondly, they didn't give the defense documents they were supposed to get in the course of the litigation. And thirdly, they actually had 2 conversations with the trial judge suggesting that he might want to be the director of the FBI after J. Edgar Hoover died. And in the end, the judge threw the case out for prosecutorial misconduct, which really all was a precursor to Watergate, and allowed Ellsberg to go free. Otherwise, I think he was facing 117 years in jail. And he said how that was the happiest day of his life when the case was thrown out. The real question with Bradley Manning, I think, is not so much his punishment, which we don't know, but I don't think things augur well for him, but rather, how is it possible? I mean, really, the biggest question of WikiLeaks is how is it possible for a private to get hundreds of thousands of confidential, classified, sensitive documents, particularly diplomatic documents, How can a private get access to all that? I can't get access to my own financial records because I can't get through all the PIN numbers I need.
Yes.
And this guy's getting hundreds of thousands of classified documents.
They weren't high security, though, they were sort of mid-level security clearance.
They were secure enough that everyone gets all upset about the disclosures.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, you don't feel it augurs well for Bradley Manning. You could face, I mean, you're talking about Ellsberg facing 170 years. It could be of that level.
I don't think things augur well at all, right? And that is, I mean, you know, that's really, that presents very different questions than the press, it seems to me. I think
it's about
worth
source protection,
distinguishing.
isn't it? I mean,
well, that's the middle ground. In other words, you know, it's different when you're going to prosecute the inside leaker, who's a government worker who's agreed not to disseminate documents and it violates that trust, and the press, whose role it ultimately is, as we've discussed, to monitor government and to disclose these sort of things, as I say, subject to some sort of responsible filtering. But the place in between is what happens if government doesn't know who the leaker is. And that's a real pressure point. Fortunately for us, that didn't happen in this case. It seems to be known who the leaker is. And in the same as the Pentagon Papers case, it was Ellsberg, and that was known by the government right away.
well, it's not known. How good are source protections in the US?
But source protections, I mean, so what happens if the government doesn't know is that they can try to get the press to say who leaked you these documents because we want to go after them, not you. But if the government, if the newspaper says, well, they're confidential sources who I agreed to give them confidentiality and I won't disclose, then the government can ultimately hold you in contempt and send you to jail. And the answer to your question is that source protections in the U.S. are a balancing test, that in this sort of leak situation, the protections aren't particularly strong, and that actually in Europe, for the most part, the source protections, I think, are a little bit more secure than they are in the States.